What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next I have an awesome unboxing here. I'm really excited to show off the books that are in here. And then I have also had quite a few people recently say that they've been getting into Golden Age books, they've been having questions about them. So I'm going to talk about some of the tips and tricks that I have picked up along the way related to Golden Age books. Also going to go into some buying, selling, and investing advice related to them. That can also be applied in general for comics. So hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned. So before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. Now, like I said, I have had quite a few people recently in the comments that have been saying that from watching these videos that they have been starting to get into Golden Age books, and they've had some questions about it, how to really get into it in the first place, how to invest in it, how to kind of navigate some of the challenges that come with Golden Age books. And I know from my history of making videos that are related to Golden Age books, they don't seem to do as well, so prove me wrong on this one, so maybe I can make some more. So make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share the video, all that kind of stuff. But before I do that, I'm going to get into this box, and the reason I picked this one for this video is because there are a couple pretty rare, awesome Golden Age books in here. One of them is 100% going onto my keepers list. The other one, maybe, maybe not. I haven't decided yet about that. But these I picked up from Instagram. I picked them up from a seller on Instagram that goes by Polanski. And if you have ever watched his sales, he has some of the most incredible books. And I'm not just talking about Golden Age, even though his focus is definitely Golden Age. He has high grade Silver Age books, you know, every once in a while some Bronze Age books, that kind of thing. And so if you're ever looking just for an awesome sale to watch, make sure you follow him on Instagram, because you will see some really cool books. So you can see everything was packaged well. They're inside that box with lots of bubble wrap, all that, and then it's in this cardboard here. So I'm going to cut into these books, and then we're going to talk about some tips and tricks that I picked up and how to start collecting, investing in Golden Age comics. All right, and then when I get into talking about the Golden Age a little more, that kind of thing, I've got some of my books over here as well that I'll be showing as examples. Just some ideas on what types of books you might want to start looking into if you're looking at getting into Golden Age comics. All right, so there are two books in here. This first one is an extremely rare Golden Age book. This one is from a publisher called Chesler, and this is Bullseye Comics number 11. And this is a book that has had some really big sales lately in kind of like, I think, the 4.0 to 6.0 range. And so he had this copy available, and this one's brittle pages, and that's something that I'll probably briefly touch on later in the video as well, is that when you're talking about the Golden Age, do not concern yourself so much with things like page quality. I don't really care about page quality regardless, but especially in the Golden Age, I don't care. This book only has 15 issues on the census. And so are you really going to go, oh, I don't want that page quality, so I'm going to pass on this book that sells once every 2 years, something like that? No, you take your chance when it comes when it comes up, and you pick up that book. And so I felt like price was good on this one, so I decided to pick this one up, and I also bundled it with another book that I really, really wanted. And so this is kind of the one that's more of a question if I'm going to keep it or not, or if I'll end up selling this one. I'll probably end up selling it, but I just think it's such a cool skull cover, something I'll cover later in this video as well. And you've also got, kind of, you would call it almost like a bad girl art cover, where it's the woman shooting a guy on the cover. But yeah, 1944, Bullseye Comics, number 11, cool red cover with the skull cover, and then I've got the back here. You can see it's attached and everything. The brittle pages hurt it. I believe the top grade you can get with brittle pages is like a 3.5, and it's got some spine splitting and all that, but generally presents well for the grade, and that's one of the things I really like to look for with lower grade books. Now, the next book. This one definitely going into my keeper list. I might get this one re-slabbed just to get it in a nicer, newer slab. It's in one of the older slabs. But Such a cool cover. I've never owned this book before. Ever since I first saw it, I wanted to get a copy of this book. This is Underworld Crime #7. And so one of the genres that you've got from the Golden Age is crime. It's crime type covers. There's often some crossover between what I would call like crime and pre-code horror type covers, but this one is definitely a crime cover. It is one of the top, like you'd call like torture covers that's out there. You've got, this woman who's definitely not going to have a good day with this hot poker. That's either, I'm guessing they're torturing her to get to this guy in the back. But man, just a brutal cover. This one is from 1953, near the end of the era of the Golden Age, before the Comics Code Authority was put in place and really put the end to a lot of these types of covers for many, many years. But yeah, just this one has a lot of elements to it. It's got the attractive woman, the good girl art type cover. You've got the bondage cover where they're tied up. It's a torture cover. It's just, there's a lot going on with this one. And to me, this is one of the top crime covers that's out there. I would put it, for me personally, I'd probably put it in the top 3. It's all up to what people like for each cover, that kind of thing. But I would definitely put this one, to me, in one of the top 3 for crime covers. So super excited to pick this one up. It's got great colors and everything. No big pieces missing. It's got a subscription crease down the middle. So, the grade is the grade. It's a 3.0. Back cover. There you go. Looks pretty nice. I think there's like a couple little tears. Yeah, there's like a couple little tears and that kind of thing at the top. But overall, happy with this one. Great looking 3.0 copy. It definitely, I would say, probably hasn't been, I don't know if it's been pressed or not. I don't see it getting out of a 3, so I'm not planning on trying to get it improved. But I might try to get it reslabbed just so that it's in kind of the newer, more clear types of slabs. But yeah, Underworld Crime 7, definitely a book that is going onto my keeper list. All right, so now let's get into these tips and tricks about collecting, investing in Golden Age comics, because it can be a intimidating genre of books to get into. They can be expensive, they are rare, but they can be a lot of fun too, because there are some great covers, some awesome content that's out there, and it doesn't have to be an exceedingly expensive era to get into. There are definitely expensive books, just like any other era of comics, but you can get into Golden Age books without having to spend a ton of money. So I'm going to talk about 4 main areas. The first one are the genres in the Golden Age. The next thing is going to be about key issues and resources that are helpful if you're looking to get into the Golden Age, and then some buying, selling, and investing advice for Golden Age books, but that can also be applied to the other ages as well. So don't think that this is just information that is useful for the Golden Age. All right, so with that, let's move on to the first area that I want to talk about, and that is genres, because one of the most intimidating things about the Golden Age is just the breadth of different genres that are out there, all kinds of books that you can get into, and it can be really difficult to decide where you want to start. And so I wouldn't recommend going into all the genres. I'll talk about a lot of the different ones that are out there. I would recommend starting with 1 or 2. Figure out which ones are the most interesting to you and focus on those first. Over the 3 years or so I've been buying and selling a lot of these books, I have gotten familiar, I would say, with almost all of them, at least familiar enough with the key issues, that kind of thing. But don't expect to be at that point right away. It takes time, just like with anything, to get familiar with this. All right, so here are some of the big genres that are out there. This is not intended to be a comprehensive list. First one is you've got superheroes. Superheroes are what kicked off the Golden Age with Superman, with Action Comics #1, and they are still popular today. They've gone through Golden Age, Silver, Bronze, Modern, everything. And so superheroes are a very safe place to start. And there are 2 areas that you can really get into within superheroes. You've got ones that you have characters that are still around today that started back in the Golden Age, and then you've got the characters that have fallen off to history that you don't have anymore. So you've got characters that are popular still today, like Batman. I've got here Detective Comics #71. I've got a bunch of Batman Detective Comics Golden Age books up here. That's the type of stuff that is safe to invest in because they're characters that have been popular throughout history. There is just demand and desire for these books. Then you've got things like Action Comics. number 19. And so you got Superman, started with Action Comics number 1. And these are the types of characters, Batman, Superman, Captain America, The Flash, Green Lantern, that were around then and are still around now. Then you have more obscure superheroes like the Black Terror, who I think he's a hilarious character because you always think that he's the villain when he's on the cover just with his costume. But you have the Black Terror, you've got Fighting Yank, Green Llama, these really obscure characters. And honestly, if you're just getting into the Golden Age, I would steer clear of those because they're much smaller markets, they're much less demand for those books. Now they might be cheaper, so it seems like it's an easier way to get into it, but they're also much harder books to sell. And they're generally going to just be flat in terms of value if you're interested in having something that's going to increase in value over time. And so if you're interested in superheroes, I would focus on those main superheroes that still exist today. All right, now the next one, and this is a big one. This is one that I have really gotten into. This is horror, and when I'm talking about horror, I'm talking about pre-code horror. Whenever you hear me say that, these are the horror books from the Golden Age. It means before the Comics Code Authority was established. They can have a very wide range of content and often have overlapping types of content with other genres that I'm going to talk about here. But it can be things like ghosts and monsters, devils, skulls, that kind of thing. I just have one example here, which is Ghost Comics number 6, which is my favorite Ghost Comics cover, book from this run. And you can see this one is a crossover with Good Girl art. So you also have this woman that's on the cover that's been tied up, that's just an attractive woman in the red dress, which you'll see is a very common theme in the Golden Age, women in the red dress. But that's one of these where these types of books are one of the hottest genres that is out there right now. Superheroes that have continued through to today, as well as pre-code horror. But you just have to always be cautious with that. Just because something is pre-code horror doesn't mean that there's demand for it. You do still need to try and understand that market, and I'll talk about that a little bit later too. Then we've got Good Girl art, and that's one where you will definitely find lots of crossovers. Like I just showed there with that Ghost Comics number 6, you have that Good Girl element to that cover as well. Then I have this example here, which is Phantom Lady number 16. And so this is a Matt Baker cover, and I'll talk about Matt Baker in a little bit. But it's just where you have attractive women on the covers of the comics. That's generally what you're going to call a Good Girl art type comic. And the Good Girl comics, they are ones that really do very often have crossovers. Like I mentioned, you've got this one, which is Rangers Comics number 14, where you have this woman tied up on the cover. And this is a crossover with the war genre. And then you've got this one like this, Rangers Comics number 26. Again, attractive woman on the cover, crossover with the World War II genre. And so that's something that just when you're talking about Good Girl art, it's usually not just that. It's usually that combined with something else. Next one is war comics, and I just showed a couple examples of war comics. There are a variety of types of war comics. You have some that are just straight war books, things like Navy and Battle. But then you have ones that are mixes, where you've got superheroes like Captain America, who's fighting Nazis or fighting the Japanese, or Marvel Mystery Comics or Superman, where they're fighting in World War II. Something like that, where they're these kind of propaganda type books where they're fighting the axis of evil. And so that's where you can have these crossovers, and that is very common, and that's usually where you're going to get more demand. The straight war books, there's really not a lot of demand for those, with a few exceptions, where they're particularly graphic covers or covers that have like flamethrowers on them, things like that, where there's some element on the cover that really drives people to try to collect that book. But for the most part, you want if you're getting into collecting, you want something that has demand, you're looking for ones that have crossovers with other elements like Good Girl art, like superheroes. Now, the next one is romance, and I don't have a lot of romance books, but I do have a couple. The one that I brought over here is a Matt Baker book, and this is Teenage Romances number 3. And you'll find with romance books, it's really hit and miss. I would probably, romance books I would say is one of the more complicated areas to get into. You can have, one issue that's worth tens of thousands of dollars, and then the next issue is worth hardly anything. And so it can be really complex with romance books, and I'll talk about that with understanding pricing later. But these can be complicated to get into. They can be tricky. You can have very big price differences because of grades, because a grade like a 6.0 might be extremely rare for this book, but a 1.5 isn't. And so a 1.5 sells for almost nothing, but a 6.0 sells for thousands. And so that's where it can be really tricky with romance books, but it's just one of those examples of a romance book. Then you've got one of my other favorite areas, science fiction. And so this would also just be called pre-code sci-fi. So again, before the Comics Code Authority. And I talk about the Frank Frazetta famous Funnies run all the time. And so this is one of those books from the Frank Frazetta famous Funnies run. That's just some of the incredible sci-fi covers that are out there. And there is a ton of variety of content for sci-fi covers. Some can be really cheap, some can be really expensive. And so that's one where if that's what you're interested in, there are some pretty affordable options for getting into that. You can get into some of the weird science or weird science fantasy titles that are from EC. They can be relatively affordable and they can have some really cool cover art, and it's only going to cost you maybe $100 or $200 to get a book. You're not going to have to spend thousands. So there are definitely options for getting into sci-fi at affordable prices. Then I talked about crime earlier, and so we've got books like this, like Underworld Crime #7. Then you also that one I would call, again, a crossover between that and Good Girl Art. Then, let's see, I've got this book that I've shown a few times. This is Gangsters Can't Win #2, which it's got gangsters on it. It's clearly, it's a crime cover, but you've also got this skull on there, so you could almost call it kind of like a pre-code horror type crossover as well. This is the one that I've shown. It's got this dude punching this lady in the face on the cover. This cover is crazy to me, but yeah, so crime covers can have a huge range, and some can be worth almost nothing. Actually, I would say most are worth almost nothing. There's a lot of crime covers that are out there, a lot of crime titles that really don't carry much value and you want to steer clear of in terms of investments, but there are other ones like that Underworld Crime 7 that can carry a ton of value and have a lot of demand. Again, usually it's ones that have crossovers. So like that Underworld Crime, crossover with Good Girl Art. This Gangsters Can't Win, crossover with pre-code horror. And so that's the type of thing that you really want to look for in genres. Now then, we've also got cartoons. And so when I'm talking about cartoons, I'm talking about things like Disney or Warner Brothers. And when we're talking about Disney, they've been around a long time. There is a lot of that stuff out there. And so you really do need to know which books are keys for things like Disney or for Warner Brothers, or you can end up having books that there's just really not a lot of demand for. They might be cheap, but they're really never going to change in price because there's not a lot of people that want to buy them. But when you're talking about Disney, there's a pretty established collector base for Disney. And so Disney's pretty safe when you're getting the right types of books. This is an example. This is obviously, it's a very low grade, but this is 4-Color #9. This is the first book that Carl Barks drew Donald Duck in. And Donald Duck, the one we know today, is because of Carl Barks. It's because of how he drew that character. He looks like this today because of him. So this is something that you would consider a key issue for cartoons, for Disney. I have one other one as well that's also related to Carl Barks. This is Walt Disney's Comics and Stories #31. This is the first time Carl Barks drew Donald Duck in this title. And so this is one of the big books in this run because of that reason. And so that's where if you want to get into those cartoon type books, if you really like Disney, then you need to figure out which books are those key issues for Disney, and that's what you want to start looking for. Then there are Western books. I have a couple. I didn't bring them out here right now, but there's not a lot of demand for Western. I would generally steer clear of Western. There's a few exceptions when you've got specific artists like Matt Baker that might have done the cover. Really, Western is I think it's just not a big market, so I would generally steer clear of Western personally. Then the last one I've got on here on this list is I'll call a mix. And so I've talked about these mixes quite a bit already where you've got crossovers, but One example is Archie. And so Archie's a little tough to classify. You can call it comedy, romance, there's kind of some action in it. And this one also has this good girl art element. There's actually quite a few of those kind of innuendo type covers for Archie. This is one of my favorite covers of all time, and definitely my favorite Archie cover. And so this is Archie Comics number 50, and it's got this, you know, classic Betty cover. And so it's like Archie Comics can have a lot of different genres tied into them. And like I've mentioned with a lot of these other books, that's generally what you're going to get, is that some books aren't going to just fall into one area. I think that's an important thing to understand, is that you're going to have a lot of crossover. And what I found is that if you have multiple elements within a book, it often helps increase the demand for that book, because you're going to have a lot of people that are going to potentially want it for those different reasons. Now, for me personally, I'm interested in just about all of these different areas. You can see I've got books across all that, but my favorites personally are the superhero type comics, horror, science fiction, and the good girl art books. That's just my preference, but that doesn't have to be yours. But that doesn't mean I don't have books from those other genres, like I've shown here. For me personally, because I'm not just a collector, I'm also someone who's buying and selling books. I consider myself a dealer as well. I make sure that I'm educated in as many of these genres as possible so that I can identify those key issues, those important issues, when they come up for sale. So again, my recommendation, if you're starting to get into Golden Age, pick one or two of those different areas. Focus on that at first, and then expand as you get more comfortable in those areas. So the next thing that we're going to talk about here are the resources that are out there to help you. I'm just going to cover a few of them, but it is important, like with anything else, that you educate yourself in this area that you want to start getting into, because it's your money that you're spending. You know, when you're going out there getting these books, it's your time that you're spending. And so to me, it's important to know as much as possible when you're getting into that. So the first one is one that I think most people are going to have, and that's just an overstreet price guide. I don't have the most recent one. I think this is, it's 21-22. I think the 22-23 just came out. Haven't gotten that one yet. But the overstreet price guide, it can have things like articles that are talking about current trends in the Golden Age, all of that. But it also has some quick references that are helpful. So they've got these, top 100 comics. And while, these top 100 comics are going to be extremely expensive, but they're going to give you examples of a lot of those titles that are really popular for the Golden Age, and that can be a good starting point. And so, top comic is Action Comics 1, then Detective Comics, then Superman, then All-American 16, Batman. I mean, these are the comics that have those major first appearances in them, that have characters that are still popular today. That's why those books are so expensive, because they have such a huge fan base, because they've been popular for 80 plus years. So then the next thing you can do, though, is that they also have lists for different genres of books, like horror, romance, sci-fi, crime, that kind of thing. Now, I don't really usually consider those lists all that accurate for which ones are the top covers. Like, for example, whether you would call Punch Comics 12 a crime comic or a horror comic, it's not on this list. And it is one of the most valuable comics of the Golden Age. That's where it's one of these things where it's like, this is definitely not the be-all, end-all of lists. Like, that's the top book, so that's the most expensive one. It really doesn't work that way. But this can give you some great starting points on some of those books or titles that might have that might have some content that you're interested in. So I think the Overstreet Price Guide, it's not very expensive, it's widely available, definitely a good resource for Golden Age comics. All right, now the next one I talk about all the time, and that is these two books, these Gerber photojournals. These ones are very valuable books to have if you are getting into the Golden Age. I've shown them a lot, so if you are a regular watcher of my channel, you've probably seen these, but if you're new, basically these are books that just have effectively every cover. There are definitely ones that they don't have, or ones where they skip some, but I mean, it's just page after page after page after page of covers. I mean, every cover book that I showed here almost certainly has a picture with its cover in here. Now, it's not just showing you those covers, but that is important because that's something where it lets you quickly look through titles that you might be interested in and find covers that you think are cool, covers that you might want to start going after. And I think it's just a quick, easy way to do that. You could also use resources like Cover Price or Go Collect, where they have those pictures of those covers as well. But I think the Gerber Photo Journal is just really nice to have. It has other uses as well. I've talked about these in some other videos where they have some details. Like you can see the text there, where they have details about the rarity of the book, who the cover artist was, approximate values, that kind of thing. But they give all the information on how to interpret that in the book itself. So, but this is, if you're looking to get into Golden Age, buy the Gerber Photo Journals. I mean, I can't recommend a book more than those. I think those are extremely valuable when you're getting into the Golden Age. Next thing is the Grand Comics database. This is www.comics.org. One of the reasons that it is very important for me is that it is a great resource for getting things like page counts. Because if you are buying raw Golden Age books, these Golden Age books have been around for a long time, and so there's a lot of stuff that can happen to them. They can have pages removed, centerfolds removed, things cut out, all that kind of stuff, and they don't have standard page counts in the Golden Age. It's not like now where almost every book is 8 pages to a cover, 8 pages to the center, and then 8 more pages than the back cover. You can have all kinds of crazy stuff in the Golden Age where they had things called half sheets, where it's just a single page stuck in, and on the other side of the staples there'll just be like a little piece of paper sticking out like this. And you might think, oh, somebody trimmed that page on the inside. The first time I saw one, that's what I thought. I was like, holy cow, somebody cut that page out. That's not what it was, because the page count was right. It's like, how is the page count right, but I can see this little piece there? And so there's things like that can be really tricky in the Golden Age, and so having something like the Grand Comics database to tell you things like page counts can be very valuable. So I would definitely recommend just going to that. It's free, it's just a web page, and if you're ever buying raw books, you should definitely have that as a resource. Now, another great one is Instagram. I can't tell you how much I have learned or seen from being on Instagram. Seeing these books that people regularly share starts to show you which are the ones that are a little more in demand, which ones are more popular, but it also just exposes you to books that you may have never seen before, because there are some big Golden Age collectors on Instagram. And so you've got to do that work. You've got to find the people that are those Golden Age collectors, follow them, check through their posts, all that kind of stuff. But I think Instagram is a great resource for not only buying comics, but also just for seeing some of the cool books that are out there. And the last one I'm going to mention is Heritage Auctions. And the reason I say that is because they sell so regularly that you can just watch one of their weekly auctions or check out one of their weekly auctions, and you can filter the results on the age of the book, whether it's gold, silver, bronze, or modern. And you could just go there and filter on Golden Age and just take a look at what's for sale. And you can do that week after week. And you can see a lot of different types of books, and it really helps familiarize you. Because for me, I've been watching those Heritage auctions for years. I don't miss them. And so I've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of Golden Age books from that. And that's how I really have found some of the books I really like. And that's also how I've been able to determine how rare a lot of books really are. If I never see them come up for sale or rarely see them come up for sale, that is a sign to me of rarity, because Heritage is a big auction house. They sell a lot, they sell regularly, and so that is a great resource for finding some of those Golden Age books that are out there. All right, so the next topic area here is key issues. And so with key issues in the Golden Age, it's different than what you have with the other ages. With silver, bronze, modern, copper, all of that, it's really first appearances, second appearances, origin stories, with a few exceptions for key covers, that kind of stuff. But when you get into the Golden Age, yeah, first appearances are still important, but there are only so many characters that are still relevant today that had their first appearances in the Golden Age. And the ones that are extremely expensive. We're talking about things like Batman #1 for the Joker and Catwoman, Action Comics 1 for Superman, All-American 16 for Green Lantern, Flash Comics 1, which I believe is the Flash and Hawkman, Captain America Comics 1, which is first Captain America, Marvel Comics 1, which is the first Human Torch, and it's kind of like the first Submariner, and then All-Star Comics 8, first Wonder Woman. I mean, these are books that are worth hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. And so they really aren't something that most people are ever really going to own. And yeah, there are other first appearances that you can get that are more obscure characters, but again, it's more obscure characters. There isn't really something that's ever going to drive the value in those books. So if you're looking for something from an investment perspective, you have to go into other areas to try to find books that are more affordable, but are also key issues. And because of that, a lot of the key issues in the Golden Age tend to be based on cover content. And so you've got things like violent or shocking horror covers, like Crime Suspense Stories number 22, the book that I've shown before where it's the Johnny Craig cover where he's holding the decapitated head of a woman he's just killed. You know, crazy stuff like that. Or Good Girl covers, like that Phantom Lady cover I showed, or Phantom Lady 17, which is the most expensive Good Girl art cover that is out there, done by Matt Baker. The one that sold on Heritage Auctions for, it was like $264,000, something like that. And then you have covers that have ties to history. So things like World War II covers with the Human Torch or Captain America. You've got Marvel Mystery Comics, you've got Captain America comics, books like that. Then you've just got, in general, cool covers. You know, things like, some of the stuff that I have up there, where you've got this awesome Catwoman cover, you've got just cool Batmobile cover there, just covers that have just really cool content on them. And so those are things like what I've shown there, or like Superman number 9, where Superman's, crashing through the front page of the comic. Things like that, where it's just a cool looking cover that people are going to want because of that. Then you've got things where it's first events on cover. So Batman number 9, which is one of my favorite Batman books, that's the first spotlight cover for Batman, where there's a spotlight on Batman and Robin. Or Batman number 20, which is the first Batmobile on the cover. Those types of things where it's, in the Silver Age, that's really not going to be as key of an event, but in the Golden Age, those books can command a significant amount of value because of those covers. Then the last thing is specific artists. There are certain artists where their covers are just in a lot more demand. I showed the Frank Frazetta cover. So Frank Frazetta for Sci-Fi is definitely one of those. Then you've got Alex Schomburg, who did a lot of the Captain America and Marvel Mystery War covers. L.B. Cole, who I've shown has the... He's known, his most well-known ones are horror covers like this. This is Startling Terror Tales number 11, where it's just this crazy skulled spider with these people he's killed on the cover. Then you have Matt Baker, who's most well known for drawing the Good Girl art type covers, but also his romance covers have been getting a lot of attention lately. Then you've also got artists like Joe Doolin, Jack Kamen, Maurice Whitman, Lou Fine, Jack Davis, Johnny Craig. There are just these great artists that, because they did those covers, those books can command a lot of value. And so learning about specific artists can really help you understand which books are going to have value, because there can be a run where that artist didn't do all of them. He might have done these 3 issues, and that's why those issues are worth so much. That's actually something I talked about recently with a book called 7 Seas, or Run 7 Seas. Matt Baker did the covers for issues 4 through 6. He did not do the covers for 1 through 3. He's an interior artist, but not the cover artist. Issues 4 through 6 sell for a ton of money. Issues 1 through 3, not nearly as much. And so that's where understanding within the run which artists did those covers can be very valuable information. One thing I've also picked up with key issues is that if you think a cover is cool, it is very likely that someone else thinks that cover is cool too. So you will eventually learn that just looking at covers, you just go, that is cool. I think I might want to look into that one because I bet that's probably a pretty popular book. And I had that happen recently. I picked up a book last weekend on Heritage. It's not here yet, but it was a cover I had never seen before. That does not happen to me very often. And I was just like, that is a crazy cover. And so I looked it up. I decided to watch that book that week, and I ended up picking it up because, I mean, like I said, I've watched basically every Heritage auction for 3 years, and I couldn't remember ever seeing that cover come up for sale before, and it's a crazy one. So definitely be showing that one in a couple weeks whenever that one shows up. But sometimes you will find that even if you think a cover looks like it's pretty cool, it doesn't have a lot of value. One example that I found of this are Shadow Comics. There are a lot of cool skull covers in there that they just really don't carry that much value. I don't know why that is, but that run of books just hasn't caught on. So that's why it's important to have some of the information I'm going to talk about next. So the last segment here that I'm going to talk about is buying, selling, and investing in the Golden Age. And that's where really understanding what books have value is extremely important when you're getting into this, because one of the really tricky parts with the Golden Age is that it's a long period of time. It started in 1938 with Action Comics #1, and it went until Showcase #4 with the first appearance of the Flash in 1956. Now, some people will break it up into two segments. They'll say the Golden Age is about 1938 to 1946, and then you have the Atomic Age from 1947 to 1955. I generally just lump them all together and say Golden Age from 1938 to 1955. So there are a ton of titles that existed during this time period, and a lot of them don't have value. And even within titles that have books that are valuable, a lot of the other issues might not have any at all. And so it is important to know that, because you can have people that are trying to sell you books that'll be like, oh, this comic is so rare, you should get this. But just because a book is rare does not mean that book is valuable. If nobody wants to buy it, it means it's not valuable, even if there's only one of them or two of them out there. So that's a big thing to make sure you're aware of, is that rarity does not equal value. Rarity can make a book valuable if a lot of people want it, but it does not equal value. And I think that's something that's really important to know, because it's something I see a lot, where I see people selling books that I feel like they're selling them because they're trying to hype them up because they're rare, and that does not make the book worth anything. And so you really do need to understand what the value of that book is if you're getting into this. Now, the other thing is that there's rarity on census and actual rarity. And by rarity on census, I mean if you look at the CGC census, how many copies of that book are out there. So you can have a book that's very rare on the CGC census because nobody gets it graded, because it's not worth anything. So just because there are a couple copies of a book on the census doesn't necessarily mean that the book is rare. It just means, it could mean that the book has no value, so nobody's sending it in to get graded. But if a book does have a lot of value and there are very few copies on the census, an example like this one, where I think I said there are only 15 copies on the census and it sells for quite a bit of money, that's where you have rarity and you have value. And that's where you really need to know your pricing. And I will say this in every single video that I make about buying and selling comics. If you are buying and selling comic books that are even $100, if you're doing that regularly, $100 books, you need to get a pricing service. eBay is not sufficient, especially when you're talking about Golden Age, because they are books that don't sell nearly as often. You need to get, I don't care which one it is, I have all three. I have GPA, I have Cover Price, and I have Go Collect. Because to me, I have different uses for each one of them. They all have different value to me, and so I recommend any of them. If it gets you to get a pricing service so that it can help you determine values on books when either you're buying or selling, you need to get a pricing service. And like I said, I have all of them. They aren't that expensive. I think GPA is like $12 a month. Cover Price is like $6 a month, and I think Go Collect I pay $6 a month. Go Collect's prices may have gone up, but I pay for a year. So whatever I signed up for, I keep paying for. So they aren't that expensive, but they can be invaluable. They can pay for themselves with preventing one bad decision. One book that you overpay by $100 covers a year of fees. One book that you underprice by $100 pays for a year of fees. And I see people that underprice books by $1,000 or more. How many years of fees could you have paid for with that one simple mistake? And so that's why I say with these pricing services, too many people go cheap on the wrong things. This is not something that you should go cheap on. So this is an area where you can really help yourself. For example, like I talked about earlier, I see people often asking crazy prices for some Golden Age books just because there's a skull on the cover or something like that. Look the book up. See if the price that they're asking is somewhere at least within range, that it's reasonable for that book. And you can get an idea if that asking price is in line, if it's insanely high, or if it's a great deal. And you can decide to pass on that book or not. Now, also with investing, and this really applies to all ages, and this is specifically talking about investing. You're talking about investing in books. A lot of people will tell you that you should buy what you like. For investing in comics, that is bad advice, in my opinion. And so, yes, it's good to buy things that you like so that you enjoy that part of the hobby, but you also need to make sure you're buying things that other people like too. If only you like it, there's nobody to sell that book to when you eventually want to sell it. And so for good investments in comics, you need to have some return on that investment, and you also need to be able to sell it when you want to sell it. And so, yes, with straight collecting, if it's just something you're going to hold and you never are ever going to sell that book, sure, buy what you like only. But if you're talking about investments, you need to also buy what other people like. Next thing with pricing is learn how to price rare books. Now, this doesn't just apply to Golden Age. This also will apply to Silver Age books that are in high grade that don't sell very often. And so there are a few ways to price rare books because it's not as easy as pricing modern, copper, bronze, and even silver that sell very regularly. With Golden Age books, you might only have 1 or 2 sales a year for a book in any grade. And so you need to learn how to price books based on that type of information. So there are a few ways to do it. One way, probably the most common way, and this is what I do with a lot of Golden Age books, is that you look for any recent sale for that book. And you're going to look at how many dollars per grade point. And so if you had a book that was a 4.0 that sold for $1,000, that's $250 per grade point. 4 times 250 is 1,000. So if you're trying to estimate a 6.0, then you're going to say that book at least is probably worth 250 times 6, or $1,500. But you also need to be aware that, especially in the Golden Age, as grades go up, the prices don't just go up linearly. They will often kind of go like this. And especially as you get near top of the census type books where it's the highest grade copies that are out there. So you would say maybe the minimum price for that 6.0 is $1,500, but maybe it's actually more like $1,800. And so that's the type of information that you need to use, that where you can at least get an idea what you can estimate the value of that book as. Now, another thing that can be very helpful is looking at nearby books and that have relatively similar cover content. And so if you have a skull cover in this one issue and then a skull cover in another issue, one issue later, that one issue later has sold a number of times, but this issue hasn't, you could roughly use that other issue to try and get an estimate of what this book might sell for. That is definitely a more obscure way of doing it, but sometimes you just don't have the information, and you have to kind of try to use that to make those guesses, especially with very rare books. But the one that I really recommend the most is trying to use dollars per point and make estimates based on that. The next thing with investing in these Golden Age books is really looking for where those trends are. A lot of Golden Age books really stay flat for a very long period of time. They don't jump up. They don't have really spec that's going to cause a book to move. And so looking for trends, books that are popular in the Golden Age, is also very important. Right now, some of those big areas are pre-code horror. Pre-code horror is one of the strongest trends right now, but it's not every book. You do really need to understand what types of covers, what titles, what publishers, that kind of thing. Then you've got recognizable heroes. Heroes like Batman, Captain America, Human Torch, Submariner, those types of characters that are relevant today and were relevant back in the Golden Age, those are ones that are definitely strong trends right now. The next one is popular artists. Matt Baker, Alex Schomburg, Frank Frazetta, and L.B. Cole are probably the 4 most popular cover artists right now. But the one thing you really do need to remember when you're talking about cover artists is content matters. And so with Alex Schomburg, for example, his covers in Marvel Mystery Comics for World War II era books, where they've got Nazis on the cover especially, are the ones where They just go straight up. But when you go after World War II in that same title, and it's like bank heists and that kind of thing, those books, they don't climb nearly as much. There isn't as much demand for them. And so it is important when you're looking at cover artists to also really understand how important that cover content is. Next thing is that patience is important, but sometimes you just need to act. For me, in the other ages, when I'm talking Silver Age, Bronze Age, Copper, Modern, I am extremely patient. I wait for the right price for that book, or I don't buy it, because I know that book is going to come up again for sale, and I'm not going to have to wait all that long for it. I don't really have to worry about that with the Silver Age. With the Golden Age, I kind of apply that rule. I am extremely patient, and I will walk away if the price isn't right, but my range for if that price is right is a little larger. For me, when I'm looking at my margins on a book, I'm willing to take less of a margin on a rare Golden Age book because I just know how rare that book is, and that if I don't buy it then, it might be years, if ever, that I'm able to get a copy of that book. And so, yes, patience is important in the Golden Age, but sometimes you just need to act, because there are some very rabid collectors out there for the Golden Age, and for certain covers, for certain artists, for certain types of content, they're going to sell. And so you need to make sure that you act on that when you see it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to massively overpay for something. If the price isn't right, you can still walk, but just be a little more flexible with what the right price is when you're dealing with the Golden Age. I also wanted to talk about why I like to invest in the Golden Age. Now, you can pick your own reasons why you might want to get into that, but for me, I like just the cover content that exists back then. I think there's some great content in things like the pre-code horror and the sci-fi, where this is where a lot of that stuff really started from. I think that's cool. I like that you've got these characters like Batman and Superman that are still relevant today. I like how you have the historically relevant covers where you've got propaganda war covers and you've got war bonds covers. All that kind of stuff I think is just really appealing to me. It's something I like. But from an investment standpoint, I really like that it's relatively safe. And so by that I mean there's not a lot of it out there. The books are relatively rare, and so you're not going to have someone undercutting you when you're trying to sell a book. Whereas with more modern books, when somebody decides to start undercutting, you just have prices go down and down. With Golden Age, that's really not going to happen because it's just not that much of it out there. Now, it does tend to take a little longer to sell Golden Age books, so that's something you have to understand. They don't tend to be quite as liquid, and so that's a downside, but that's something you have to understand when you're getting into it. But I do like that it's just relatively safe. The prices tend to stay either flat or slightly increased, which from the investment standpoint, that's something that I just find really appealing because they feel stable, they feel safe, and I don't have to worry about nearly as much of the whims of the market impacting their prices. Now, the last thing that I wanted to mention with respect to buying, selling, investing in the Golden Age is that universal copies are not the be-all, end-all that they really are in the Silver, Bronze, and Copper and Modern ages. With those ages, because the books are so plentiful, you really don't have to sacrifice and go for a restored book or a qualified book. But in the Golden Age, if there are only 20 copies of that book in existence, and your only opportunity to pick one up is a restored copy or is a qualified copy that's missing a centerfold or has a married cover or something like that, then it's much more acceptable to pick up those books. There's still a lot of demand for restored books, for qualified books from the Golden Age. That's not nearly as true in the other ages because there's so much available out there. But in the Golden Age, that's why, for me, for example, this Phantom Lady 16 that I picked up, it's a 7.5 qualified because it's missing the last page, and so it's incomplete. But I know how hard it is to come across this book. I especially know how hard it is to come across this book in a condition that looks nice, and so for me, that was something that I was willing to do. And you can also just get those as a filler copy until maybe you come across the actual, universal copy at some point in the future, and then you can replace it. I did that for my Famous Funnies 215. I had I still have it. I have it listed for sale now. I have a 3.5 qualified that I believe is missing the centerfold, and I replaced it with a 5.0 universal. But that's one of those types of books where I'm willing to take a qualified book. I'm willing to take a restored book because they're so rare. And so there really isn't that scarlet letter so much on the qualified or restored books in the golden age that you have with the silver, bronze, and modern ages. All right, so I know this was a long video. I hope there was some useful information for those of you that had said that you were interested in the Golden Age, getting into the Golden Age, some tips that you can walk away with. I focused on 4 different areas: the genres, key issues, resources, and buying, selling, and investing. Hopefully you found this useful. If you did, make sure to share this video, like, comment, subscribe, because that helps me determine if it's something that I want to make another video for, because it takes a lot of time and effort to put these things together. So I want people to actually watch them. So again, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. I've got more videos over here if you'd like to watch some of my other videos, and the subscription button right here. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next video.